Recording is started. All right. Today is day 2, OpenStack Cloud, day 2. My name is Sal Cosentino. I'm your trainer today and architect, cloud architect. Today's March 25th, 2025. Just to review what we had yesterday in yesterday's topics, we talked about OpenStack. We also talked about what is a hypervisor, difference between hypervisor 1 and hypervisor 2. And Wayne, I think I sent you the PowerPoint presentation for that, so you should have that available. And every day I'll send you the PowerPoint presentation. And if we do come across Murphy's Law type error, what I do sometimes is I add it into the next day. So I like to talk about whatever issues or questions that you have, so that we can discuss those and reassure that you have documentation on that. Or if you have any doubts regarding that specific topic, I usually bring those up the next day. So anything you see in today's doc as well too, you'll have in this presentation as well. So I know we talked about a few things. So whatever we talked about, I'll add it onto the next doc. So again, we talked about the hypervisor 1 and hypervisor 2. We downloaded, we registered and created your Broadcom account. So you should be able to now log in to that with no problems. We've also downloaded the VMware Workstation Pro 17, which is the latest version. It was the 6.1 version, and we're up to date with that. Made sure that we're up to date with that. Then I also showed you how to manually just to download the VMware tools. I'm going to show you how to add the tools manually and how to install it within Workstation Pro. So you're going to know how to do that today. And then we've installed Workstation Pro together. We've downloaded Ubuntu 24.02.
Okay.
Right. And we've downloaded the LTS, which is the long-term service, which is 5 years for that. And that's it. So in today's class, we're going to continue again with questions and reviews and talk about the assignment. You have any questions about the assignment? Or downloaded? Did you download Ubuntu and create a new virtual machine? Just for practice, if you had, I have any questions? Or can we move forward?
Questions as
All
of
good.
yet. Yeah.
All right. So I'm looking at some of the questions here, and I noticed that you said why we're choosing 2 network cards. It's just for high availability and for network teaming. One's gonna be your for internet, and then one's gonna be for internet, and one's gonna be for our VLAN or static
Local
IP
VLAN.
address. Yeah, our local VLAN, right?
Okay.
All right. So again, today we're gonna talk about that. Do you have any questions regarding the 2 network cards?
I think that's good. Thank
You're
you.
good to go. Okay. And I also want to talk about the download. Did you download the Ubuntu? We have that question. We also talked about what disk sectors are. So I want to bring up what disk sectors are.
Mhm.
All right. So we talked about what disk sectors are, and again, we slowly talked about disk sectors. I also wanted to talk about within your 2 disks that we created yesterday. We talked about we have a bare metal machine with 2 disks, right? So we had our physical disks, if you remember, right? We had one that was C and one that was E, and then we had our neck cards that represent the triangles that you see here, right? So we can. What happens is you can also set up RAID on a physical bare metal server machine. So if you go to the marketplace and you buy a server like a Dell server or anything like that, we can set something up called RAID. That's another option that I wanted to bring up on these physical servers, and we can also set these up on our virtual machines. Do you know what RAID is?
Redundant array, independent disk.
Yeah, that's correct. Good job. So again, we have different types of arrays, RAID arrays, right? So we have our RAID 0, we have our RAID 1, our RAID 5, and our RAID 10. All depends on what we're using it for and why we're using it for. So between our four options, when we do go back and we do create our disks, I'm going to stop sharing and share my full screen here. Give me a second. I'm just going to share the screen. You see the screen?
Yes.
Yeah, so you see my paint. So this was my two discs that I created, right, on my BareMetal machine. So our BareMetal machine is a blank machine with nothing in it. It's got just RAM hardware. It's not even powered on yet. So we have our two discs here, right? So our physical discs, right? We have our two physical discs. One, right? And then I'm gonna represent another color for that so that we know what that is. And I'm gonna make this a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller here. And I'm going to give it a little, okay. So, and then go a little bit bigger here. So do you see that? Do you have any issues? Can you see what I'm writing here, or is that too small?
That's fine.
It's too small?
That's fine.
So,
That's
okay,
good.
perfect. Okay, so we have our two physical disks. We have our physical disk 1 and our physical disk 2, right? So when we look at our physical disks, right, we don't have a letter yet. They're offline. So it's similar to disk management. You know what disk management is, right? Disk management. So do you remember what disk management is? Disk management. So
Sure.
if you, so if we're going into our machine, when you share your screen, I'll show you where disk management is. But when we're going into our machine, you're searching or running disk management. It's a control panel option. Within that, you're able to see all your disks, right? And within that, you're able to create your RAID arrays, right? So if your physical disk 1 C, and then you have your other one that's E, right? Like that's how we designed our dock there. So if we wanted to set up RAID 0, this is where the data gets split into blocks and gets written across all the drives. So there's no mirroring or parity or anything um, that that requires um, like block level striping. It's not really redundant in this aspect, so we wouldn't use RAID or RAID 0. We're looking for something that's redundant in this aspect, and it has its disadvantages across. Like if one disk goes down, the whole volume goes down. So it's not really redundant when we're setting up those disks with RAID 0 on your BareMetal machine. Let me see if I can cut this in half for you here. And we'll grab that. Do you see that? You see my picture?
On the right, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So if we're looking for like our RAID or RAID zeros, right? It's if one of the disks. See if I can grab my pen here. So if one of the disks goes down, like it goes down, right? The whole volume goes down, right? So that means that
Zero.
data is
Yeah.
lost. You lost that's not a good idea in this instance, right? It's not really redundant where, hey, well, if my data's being copied from C to E and my C goes down, I lose C and E, right? So if one of those goes down, it doesn't matter how many disks we have, the whole volume goes down, right? And the data's lost. So whatever data you were putting in here gets lost. Another disadvantage is it's not fault tolerant. The third and last disadvantage should not be used for critical devices or systems. So, if we're using a critical device like an application or a web server, it's critical. You have users logging in and going in and out and using the store, for example. They're using the store and, like a e-commerce site, and they're inputting their credit card information and they're buying data, making sure that this bare metal machine, this server, with these two disks and these two network cards, if you're putting data in here and it's saving your data within here, it's not really beneficial to use this type of RAID 0 on it, right? So then we go to the second RAID, and when we look at the second RAID, see if I can move this out of the way. Okay, get this. Okay, so I want to fresh new. So if we're looking at RAID 0 is basically redundant to hard disks, right? So if data gets written to both the data drive and the mirrored drive, um, it gets written to both the data drive, right, which is our C drive, and our mirrored drive. So we're gonna be basically mirroring this C drive. So whatever data is here is gonna be mirrored here. So there's an exact duplicate copy of it. Um, in my case, the physical disks are virtual. Yes, that's correct, because they do run on an operating system. So they're basically they're still physical, right? But we call them V disks. They're not physical disks, they're V disks. So in a virtual environment, we call virtual disks, and those disks have a virtual memory file system. They're called VMFS, that's their file system. And then on a physical, they use NTFS file system. So I'll make a different note on that for you so you know that there's two different aspects of that. So if I'm looking for the shapes here, oh, take the shape here. And so that's our NTFS, right? And those are across the board. So it uses an NTFS volume. Right? Whereas virtual disks, if you're creating a virtual disk, let's use our virtual disk here, right? It still has a hard drive, right? But with a different volume, right? They kind of rename it differently, right? So if this is our VM, for example, right? And you have it's not really run over the operating system, but it kind of is in a virtual environment because we're using our Hyper 2 software as that and creating that service through a software, right? So basically, yeah, our system is kind of run on a um it's kind of run through an operating system, right? Because our OS level, we're on our OS level, right? Where our hypervisor is, sorry, our OS and then our hypervisor, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then this is where we create our machines, right? So it's the software that we're using to create it. Um, so again, in a RAID 1, so for example, if this was our RAID 1, you have any questions regarding that? What
Yeah,
I
I'm
just
good.
said?
Thanks.
You're good?
I'm fine.
Does that answer your
Hmm.
question?
Yes.
Perfect, perfect, perfect. So basically, in this instance, Wayne, um, RAID 1 mirrors the same data on the two drives. So again, it mirrors the same data. So you're gonna get an exact copy of, like, if there's 3 lines in this drive, you're going to get 3 lines in the E drive type of thing, right? So you're going to get the same data that's going on those two drives. And again, this is because it's going to mirror it on two drives. We're also ensuring that our security through fault our data security falls under the fault tolerance and redundancy um points, right? So it makes sense to have it in case there's any it becomes fault tolerant, right? And it also good for redundancy when we have our backup systems and we're mirroring it twice. So basically, it's 2 disks in one, and it mirrors the same thing. So you have two exact copies of it, right? So setting up on a RAID 1 RAID array is actually important. In this instance, why not create a second another drive? Let's say, for example, for logs and transactions, right? So we can kind of create this, let's say, F drive or G drive, right? We can call this F, and we can create an F drive, for example, and this could be for our logs and transaction files, right? Make sense?
Yes.
Right? Or we can have this as, installation, application directory installation. So instead of keeping, like, for example, our C drive, we can keep um, right? And have a mirrored copy on 2 disks. So we have a mirrored copy. So we have 2 disks with an operating system on it in case of, right? So any information that's traveled would be mirrored there. So any data that we add within here, within our documents, within our whatever, within our user profile, right? So our user profile is basically mirrored from C to E, right? And then we can actually create another one if we wanted to, and then use that for log files and transaction files, right? And that's actually I've seen this done a lot across a lot of companies that I've dealt with and seen and talked. So on the RAID one as well, our data gets written twice. So again, like I said, it gets written in our virtual disk C and virtual disk E in your instance, or on top of our bare metal, it's physical. So you're going to get the same data twice. They do have its disadvantages, but I want to talk about some of the and it does work again with mirroring and redundancy. So you're mirroring and it's very redundant when it mirrors, right? But in RAID one, like I said, you need a minimum of 2 disks for RAID one to occur. So if you do not have 2 disks, then you can't use the RAID one RAID array. The minimum is 2 disks, so I'll say 2 disks for RAID one. Min is 2 disks, and then our maximum is 32 disks, right? So we can have up to 32 disks on our RAID array on our SAN solution, right? Um, See if I can get a picture to kind of show you what I mean for bare metal. See if I can get you something here. This will help a little bit. We get a picture. There we go. Perfect. So you see my screen? Do you see this? So this is an example of a storage SAN storage solution, right? So this is sort of like our server, right? So when we're looking at our bare metal, this is what our bare metal looks like, right? So we have, let's say, for example, in this server here, we have each box that you see. Oh, let's see if I can use that red color there. So if we look at it, this little box here, right, is 1 disk, right? Right. So basically, this will have our physical disks within, and then this one here, we can say we'll have these two right here will have our logs and transactions. So however we want to set these up, we can set these up however we want, right? So in terms of that, and then set up our RAID arrays um, based on our minimum two concept. So 2 disks for RAID array. And again, it's there. Like I said, it's advantages that we want to look at too, because a lot of companies do use RAID one, right? So you have to kind of think about the good and the bad and the ugly when it comes down to what to use and what not to use it. So in this instance, if the data drive fails, the controller either uses the data wing or the mirrored drive, right? So if there's data recovery or any continuous operations, this is where we could say, hey, if the data fails, yeah, perfect. The controller is going to use either the data, right, which is your C drive, or your mirrored drive, which is your E drive, right? So at this instance, there's its advantage, right? But when the problem is the storage capacity is only half of the total drive capacity, right? So that's sort of like where, the storage capacity of 1 disk is only half of the drive. Make sense?
Yes.
That's a disadvantage actually with RAID run, and a lot of people, they don't realize that, hey, you can have a RAID run RAID array set up on our bare metal machine, but hey, our storage capacity is only half the total drive capacity. Will that work for us? No, in some instances it doesn't, right? So when we're designing, right, or architecting our bare metal machines, right, in our environment, or in our data center, we have to make sure that we're aware of that, right? There's different aspects of why not, right? So again, minimum 2 disks, maximum 32. Um, there's no performance overhead on this RAID one. but it can tolerate the loss of one disk. So again, we can tolerate the loss of the C drive and still work on the E drive, right? You'll still receive the full performance of the drive, like I said, but half the capacity, but it's at half the capacity that you would normally get. So going back to one of the disadvantages, there's no performance overhead, right? You can tolerate that disk, but you'll still receive that full performance of the drive, right? But half the capacity that you would normally get on that one drive, right? Okay. There is, again, you should also use RAID 1 for critical devices. So, people still use it. Like, not just worry about like okay, so you can see that there are its disadvantages, but we have to also think about why we would use RAID 1. I've seen a lot of people use RAID 1 for critical system devices like accounting, finance departments, where you have two data drives that will be used in a small server, right? So remember, it doesn't mean that our finance department or accounting is going to have two disks. It can have a minimum of two disks, but we can have up to 32 disks on this drive. So we're gonna have the full capacity, right, of those disks, right? So when we go to, let's see if I can grab something bigger here for you. That'll make it a little bit better. So again, imagine your SAN server, your SAN solution server. So all right, you see that? See this picture? So imagine this. It's got 4 by 6, so it's got 24 disks. So this right here, I can set this up for a RAID 1 array. You understand? Wayne?
Yes.
Does
Yes.
that make sense now? So again, I can have up to 32, right? So this is a 4 by 6. So this has got 24 disks on here on my BareMetal machine. So the first one I showed you was just a small server that they used to use back in the days. These ones were these are HPs. So this HP server here has it's got 8 disks, right? So this is sort of like a physical server that I would use in my home environment or my test environment. We're gonna get to RAID 10 work. We're gonna actually talk about RAID 10 soon. So there is a RAID 10, yes, Wayne. But in this instance, if we're looking at our minimum and maximum for RAID 1, you're looking at a minimum of 2 disks and a maximum of 32. So if we were to show up and we were to purchase this in the marketplace or have this existing in our devices, then this would work for RAID 1 because we have 24 disks, right? Make sense?
Yes.
All right. So that's RAID 1. Again, if again, it's advantage again. If it fails, the controller uses, like I said, you will receive the full performance. But especially when we're using like finance department systems, applications, again, if you have two drives, right? If you have two data drives that would be used in a smaller server, that's where we would use that aspect, right? Now we also have something called RAID 5. Um, so RAID 5 is the next topic conversation here. Get this cleaned up for you here. Okay. All right. So I have that picture for you. Say this one here is it's in here. So this is our BareMetal machine, okay? And then these we can have virtual machines on top of our BareMetal machine. So we can have multiple virtual machines installed. So we'll say these are our two. This is our finance and our accounting virtual machine with virtual disks, right? So in a RAID 5, RAID 5 uses a lot of redundancy. It uses redundancy to hard disks. Again, it's very redundant as well too when you're using the RAID 5. This one here uses stripe set to parity. What I mean by that is, second. So Stripe set to parity. It uses the blocks inside. So what it does is it takes like each disk has blocks within it, right? It has stripes. They call it stripes, right? So each disk has a block of storage within it, within that storage, right? So that's what RAID 5 is, right? It is redundant. It is redundant. Yes, it is redundant. And if that fails, you always have you'll have your three disks in a RAID 5. Again, by default, you need a minimum of three disks. So if we're gonna go to RAID 5 and decide to use RAID 5 in this instance, we would create another drive here, a physical drive, and we would call this F, right? So that's has to be by default. In order to use RAID 5 in our scenario, we need a minimum of three disks. Okay. So these three disks would be using RAID 5, right? So that would be a RAID 5, right? So that's RAID 5. And again, minimum is three disks, and our maximum is 32 in a RAID 5, right? We have a RAID 5. Right? Was our minimum three disks and our maximum 32. So example, these three disks would be obviously located within this RAID, right? In this, if you're looking at our BareMetal server. So our RAID 5 is a minimum of three disks and a maximum of 32. It is redundant. Again, it can tolerate the loss of one disk. So for example, if what I mean by that, I can tolerate the loss of one disk. If two or more go down, so for example, if our two disks go down in our RAID 5 array, right? The volume goes down, right? That's what happens with a RAID 5. It can tolerate that loss of one disk, but if two or more go down, then the volume goes down, then the whole thing goes down. So you lose that machine. So that's what RAID 5 is, right? So the more disks you add in a RAID 5, the better it is, right? So if this holds an application within here, these two disks hold an application, and one of the disks go down, right? So if I take out one of the disks, right, and that's these two still work, then it can tolerate it. It'll still work because it's still copying the data over to E and it's still copying the data over to F, right? So, but if we decide to now say, hey, okay, this disk goes down, then the whole volume goes down. Okay. So that's what RAID 5 is. So now we're going to be talking about RAID 10. Right? We're going to be talking about RAID 10. And RAID 10, we call it a nested environment. RAID 10, it's called nested. 10 is, we call it 1 plus 0. Right? 1 plus 0. Right? And in that instance, we're creating a stripe set from a series of myriad drives in a RAID 10. And we can tolerate it, sustain multiple drive losses, right? So we can lose as many as we want. It'll still tolerate that. So it takes both and it tolerates the two. Um, so if we were to draw it out, okay, so that's 1 plus 0. So if we were to draw, right, for example, this is what our RAID 10 would look like if I were to draw it out on a board here. So if I've got look here. So if I've got, let's write this, make this a little bit bigger. Okay. So if I've got two disks here, right? I've got two disks here. I've got two disks here. Two disks here. And I've got two disks here, right? Right. And this is one RAID, right? We call this RAID 1. This is another RAID. And then this is another RAID, right? So this would be RAID 1, right? Because remember what I said about RAID 1, right? RAID 1 is a minimum of 2 disks, so it can tolerate the loss of 1 disk. Where RAID 0 is 1 disk goes down, the whole volume goes down, right? So remember what we talked about with RAID 0. So in this RAID 10, what it does is it uses the hard disks. You have the 2 hard disks in a RAID 1 array, and then this one here would be an also. So you have 6 disks set into 2 blocks of RAID array 1s, right? So you'll have a RAID array 1 here, and then you'll have a RAID array 1 here, right? So you have 3 RAID arrays. To make this an official RAID 10, what happens now is this whole thing becomes a RAID 0. But inside of the RAID 0 are your 3 RAID array 1s. Make sense?
I believe so, yes.
Yep. So this is a RAID 1. A RAID 0, sorry. So you'll have a RAID 0, and then within the RAID 0, you'll have your RAID 1s. So you have your 2 sets of RAID 1s. This RAID 1s is just like I said, a minimum of 2 disks, right? We can have a minimum and a maximum of 32 disks. So I can keep putting more disks as long as I have. So if I have 3 disks here, then I have to have 3 disks here and 3 disks here. So I'll have 3 RAIDs, 3 RAID 1s, or 1 RAID 1 or 2 RAID 1s, but it has to be equal amount of RAID 0. Sorry, well, RAID 0 is, what was the question? In my case, one second, I think you asked me a question here. So somebody's asking me a question. Now RAID 0 is striping. You've asked the question of if RAID 0 is striping. Is that the question?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So again, like I said, RAID 0, we call it block level striping. It's called block level striping. That's what they call it. We call it block level striping.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. And again, it's if one disk goes down, the whole volume goes down and the data's lost. Okay.
Yes, got it.
And again, you'll have notes on this stuff too, just in case, and you'll have the video to review this if you have any questions. But this is important because when we're creating our environment, creating 2 disks, right, is also redundant for RAID arrays, right? So on our BareMetals, we're going to be creating these RAIDs. And these are important when we're creating these RAIDs because if something goes down, then you have something that's up again, right? So it's always good to create that. And then those, even 3 at most, have 3 disks for one BareMetal machine or 4 disks for one BareMetal machine, depending on what you're going to be installing on there, right? So if I'm going to install one application here, server, so for example, let's say this is one application, 6 drives, right? So I'm going to make sure I have 6 drives here for one application on one RAID array, right? And this is my operating system. And then this is my installation disk. This will be my installation disk. All right, let me make this red. And then this will be my logs, and whatever you want to do, right? Whatever you want to do. And those will be drive letters. So these will be drive letters, right? And those will have your different RAID arrays and whatnot. So again, 10 is 1 plus 0. So within a 0 RAID array, you'll have your RAID 1. So we can have 1 block, right? It doesn't, like, we don't need to have this. We don't need to have this. We can just have RAID 0, and then within it, we can have 2 disks with a RAID array 1, right? And again, remember what I said. Now, in a RAID array 10, a RAID array 0, if one disk goes down, the whole volume goes down. And a RAID array 1, it can tolerate the loss of 10 disks. It can tolerate the loss of one disk, right? So if the C drive goes down, right, with 1 terabyte on it, you have another one that's got 1 terabyte on it. Okay?
Got it.
Questions?
Got
Right?
it.
So imagine these being terabytes of data. So like imagine within it, you got a terabyte disk or a 2 terabyte disk, let's say, or a 10 terabyte disk. Right now. Let's make it more realistic, right? 10 terabytes, right? Or 10 terabytes, right? And then that's your RAID array 1. And then I'll show you where we set this up on the software end. I'll show you where this works actually. And once I get that. So I wanted to talk about that because that is important for you, especially when we're reviewing these things. And I know we don't have that much time left, but I want to add this stuff in this class today because I feel like this is important for you to understand, especially when we move on with creating our virtual machines in our actual data center, right? So you have to understand why we're creating this before we actually create our Ubuntu. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use this as a lecture class for today. I know we have 10 more minutes, but I want to discuss what's important and what was missed in yesterday's class so that you have a better understanding. And then for tomorrow, what I'm going to get you to do is if you can create a virtual machine with 3 disks, and then we'll get you to create it with a RAID array 1, RAID array 5, or RAID array 10 based on whatever information I gave you, and then you can make that decision. Is that okay?
Yeah, it sounds good.
Okay. All right. You. Um, so going back to what we talked about, um, again, we also talked about vCenter, vSphere. You see my screen here? We talked about vCenter, vSphere, and ESXi, and I think that's important when we talk about that, because ESXi is the hypervisor on the BareMetal machine, and I know these were questions that you had asked. So when we're looking at our machines, on our BareMetal machine or on our virtual machine, let's say for example, because that's going to be your data center that holds your BareMetal in a virtual environment, right? So that directly runs on a physical server, but in our case, it's virtual, right? So without the need of an underlying operating system. So that's where it's going to run off Photon and it's going to be all code based. It's not going to have an operating system. It's going to have code based. Photon, it's called. Okay. And that's a difference between our ESXi, or vSphere and vCenter, because a lot of people get that misconstrued and confused sometimes. So when we're looking at, let me see if I can bring up a good picture I took yesterday. There we go. So imagine this being our system here. I'm going to copy this whole thing. Copy this. See if I can copy this here. There you go. All right. So I guess that didn't work. So I'm gonna have to take a better picture of that for you. Let's do this instead. So this is an environment that I'm working on. This is a virtual environment that I work on in my own personal, and this is what I teach to a lot of students out there in a 3-tier and a 3 ESXi model environment. So when we're dealing with that, Wayne, we have we have our domain controller, which is our domain where we can access our ESXi model GUI based, so we can access the actual application. Um, Copy this, and I'm going to open up a new screen for you here, and I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. Tell me if you can see that. Can you see that?
Yes,
Can you see that? Or is that too small? Is that
that's
okay?
good right there.
Okay. All right. So think about what we said here. So when we talk about Something. Okay, so when we talk about ESXi is the hypervisor, right? So this right here, this machine here is an ESXi. That's another ESXi, and this is another ESXi. So this is an actual bare metal machine, and this is called an ESXi hypervisor. So hypervisor is it's going to be your ESXi application. That's why it's a hypervisor. So within this bare metal machine, right, on the disk is going to be ESXi hypervisor. So that's what's going to hold your code, your OS, right? So that's sort of like your OS code. So similar to Linux, it's not really GUI based. It doesn't have a desktop. It doesn't have icons. There's no GUI. It's graphical, but it's all code based. Similar to what Microsoft has. When in Microsoft they have server code, they have server core versus data center GUI or standard GUI or standard core. I don't know if you've ever installed the Windows server machine before. Have you ever installed a Windows server machine before?
Uh, Linux.
Linux machine? What about Windows, Microsoft?
Haven't done that recently.
You haven't done that recently? So when you're installing a server, for example, on this machine, and I'm going ahead and I'm installing a Windows server, right? Let's say, for example, 2019 or 2022, right? Let's say, for example, right? This is going to be a Windows machine, right? And then what we do is when we pop in the ISO image, so if we're installing the ISO on our disk, right? So this is our disk, and then we're putting in our let's say this is our D drive or our disk, right? So this is going to contain our ISO image, right? So when we boot up this machine, we're going to boot it up with the ISO image, which is what we're going to do with Ubuntu. And then within that, um, it's going to it's going to start the installation process, right? It's going to start the installation process, right? And then once it starts the installation process, it's going to give you options. So it's going to give you Windows Server 2019 Standard Edition, Windows Server 2019 Data Center Edition with GUI, right? And then it's going to give you data center version, data center standard with data center, Windows Server 2019 Standard Edition, right? Which is our server core, or Windows Server Data Center 2019 with GUI. Now, the difference is with GUI, you're going to have a full user experience. You're going to have a full UX experience, right? So you're going to have that full UX experience. Whereas our OS, right, you're going to have that code based, like BIOS, like, when you go into your BIOS type of thing, you're going to have that code base. It's all going to be code based. So that's the difference between the server core. I'm sorry, that's the difference between ESXi being right, as a hypervisor. So that's what your hypervisor is. Okay. It's going to be on our bare metal machine. So we're going to pop that into our ISO, and that's directly going to run on a physical server. And in our case, virtual, without the need for any underlying operating system. So the operating system is going to be Linux or Unix or Photon, let's say, for example. It runs virtual machines, this EXSI, right? So you can run it because you'll see when we can run it on our GUI. So you can see these. I don't know if you could see here. Tell me if you can see that. You see my arrow here. So in this ESXi model, right, we have our vCenters, VSCSA, and then we have our monitor machine, which is another VM, right? And whatever VMs we have here too. We also have our storage and our data store, right? And our networking. So in here, we can actually see where all our VMs are. I've actually installed one of these, and I'd love to show you one day. I have it installed already on my machine. So ESXi, I have a question here in the chat. Our question here in the chat is so ESXi hypervisor will run on top of the MS OS of my laptop. So in this environment, you can run an ESXi on a bare metal machine, right? Or you can run it on you can run it on a Microsoft virtual machine with Microsoft Server on it or Windows 10 on it. All you got to do is log, and that has to be obviously married together, so it needs to communicate with each other. So in that case, it's going to be a members. It's going to be they're going to be member servers, right? That are joined to the domain. So these both need to be joined to the domain. So in order for them to communicate with each other, you're going to have to join it to the domain, right? So in this case, it's called a standalone server, right? It stands alone, but it's able to communicate on the domain. So you still get that. You're still able to log in and whatnot. So in this instance, yeah, you're not going to run it on a Microsoft operating system. You're going to install it on the bare metal machine. You can see the UX when you through a web browser. So you're going to log into the internet. You're going to open up an internet browser, right? And you're going to type in the IP address from your DNS. Does that help you? That answer your question?
Just 1 second.
So your ESXi will run just on a bare metal machine, right? Even with my laptop, is even with my laptop, is it considered a bare metal installation? The virtual machine is considered a bare metal. So it's not physical, right? But it's a virtual bare metal machine. So in this case, it's going to be a ESXi um, bare metal, right? It's going to be a bare metal, but it's going to act as a bare metal machine, but it's virtual.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So remember, you need to log in to the desktop and then open the internet. So within the internet, you can see that UX experience. And further down the chain here. So like I said, further down the chain, you got these virtual machines here, right? All set up with your networking and your storage. Right. And then you have your vCenter. And I think you asked that question yesterday. vCenter server is an appliance again. It's an appliance. So this server is our appliance with Photon OS. It's Linux based. Okay. So it's going to be a Linux operating system that's just code. So sort of similar to what Microsoft uses server core. Um, so this architecture that I'm showing you is just a centralized management platform for managing multiple ESXi hosts. So or nodes. So it includes VMs and other advanced features, right? So your bare metal machine is a VM, right? So remember, yeah. So the vCenter is going to be on a VM. Yeah, it's going to be a VM that lives on your ESXi.
Got it.
Before, let's say this is dating back to the not I think 6.0, 6.5, where we had two domain controllers. So if I bring out my picture here again, there was two of these machines, right? So we had a duplicate. See if I can move this a little bit here for you. I'm going to move this a little bit. So you'd have two of these machines, domain controller machines, or two machines, right? As a standalone or a member, right? So this would be a member. Oh, grab this again here. So, so imagine two of these machines, right? And that's how it was before. Give this a little bit more space here. Sorry, I apologize. Right, so, and then, so So this is our environment, and back then this is how it would work. So we were able to actually, the vCenter was able to, we were able to install it physically, install the client here, and then we were able to manage our ESXi hosts. And that's how it was, like, let's say about 4 or 5 years ago. And then what happens is they got rid of this machine, right? And this is where ESXi hypervisors would be introduced. So they introduced this ESXi hypervisor concept, right? And then within there, we would have our physical disks, right? Or virtual disks. And then within and our data stores we would have, and then that would have our objects, our storage. Um, and that's how it was, right? And again, vCenter again is an appliance. Its architecture is centralized. So remember we talked about VIP machine. It's an appliance with a Photon OS that lives and sits inside a hypervisor environment. So it doesn't matter where we put it. We can have multiple ones, multiple vCenters, right? We can have multiple vCenters, right? We can have multiple vCenters running across three. And then with these we can actually, you know, they could be synchronizing. You can have your active server, we call it. Start text. So this will be your active, right? Which is your active server that you normally would run and work on, right? In terms of how that works. And then this can be your passive server, right? And then you can have another passive server or witness server, right? It and then if one falls down, then you can use your passive becomes active. So if the active breaks, your passive server becomes active, right? So you're working off 2 and 3 now because this is down. And then this is where you can kind of shut this down and get your text to work on it. Any questions so far? Again, we can use vCenter server to manage various types of host storage as well too. So that's what we're using for. And then again, this is the more resilience in the, yeah, that's right, more resilience in design. So this is our vSphere client, that our GUI version of it, right? So in our ESXi is where our vCenter server lives, but our client is access to our client machine. So if we have so in this instance, if I'm an employee, right, who's a contractor that's working on our VMware environment, obviously I'm gonna be able to access, all of these machines, right? So I should have access to all of these machines, right? So that's what that means. And I should be able to physically see it with my own eyes based on an IP or a DNS or just host name, right? So this is where our data center lives, right? And then this is where we can create our cluster. Remember we spoke about that, Wayne, a while back with you. We talked about clusters, and we can actually, within a cluster, let me explain cluster to you for a second here, because it is important concept. Um, clustering is actually really, really important. So what a cluster is, let's see if I can draw. So what a cluster is a bunch of servers grouped together, right? Within our ESXi's, right? So this would be our ESXi, right? That lives in our data center, right? So if I have 3 machines, I've added these 3 machines into one cluster. So my three virtual machines would be, it doesn't matter what the virtual machine is. I can have up to 64 in this cluster, right? And then this can all be grouped into one. So I can have up to a max of 64. If I can, yeah, 64, right? But let's say for our instance, for our design, our max is 3, right? So we can offer high availability, Wayne. We can offer disaster recovery. And yeah, it is more resilient because we can offer continuity features like high availability within this client here, right? So I can go into the settings here and I can manage high availability. I can manage DRS. I can manage fault tolerance. I can manage EVC. I can manage affinity rules. I can manage vSAN, right? With my minimum of 3 ESXi disks, I can manage vSAN, right? So I can create this under the data center level, right? So it's created under the data center level. But again, it's under a data center to add to the same cluster across the data center, right? So basically, our hypervisors can't connect with one cluster. You have to create one cluster in one data center and then another cluster in a second data center. That's the only difference, right? So it'll collectively gather all the information of the hardware resources. So, for example, if we have 10 hypervisors, in this, say for example we have 10 hypervisors, right, and they all have 10 terabytes of RAM, then the cluster sees that it has a total of RAM of 10. So if I'm adding 10 here, right, so our cluster will see that we have 30 terabytes, so it'll show us as 30 terabytes. Make sense?
Yes.
Got it? And the
It does.
benefit, yeah, we can calculate how much, Wayne, how much resources I want. So I can say, hey, and this is where it becomes important when we're pricing it out. We talk about hyper threading, we talk about CPU, we talk about megahertz, because this is what makes or breaks our design, right? So how much resources are required by this virtual machine? At what given time, right? So this is what we have to come. This is what we have to talk about when we look into this kind of things. Okay. Any questions so far? Any questions? Okay.
Put it in the chat.
So again, OpenStack, right? We'll begin, right, in our next class, because OpenStack is, again, it's just a project, right? OpenStack is just a project, right? So when you're installing Ubuntu, so basically OpenStack, we're gonna use it kind of like on underneath the hood, right? Concept, to create our private cloud, right? So what's gonna happen is when we look at our compute, we're gonna look at Ansible Cola, um, right, or whatever version that's there next. I've used Yoga and I've used Ansible before. So when we look at that, we won't. It's not gonna use. Um, Basically, what's gonna happen is we're gonna install the project, and then within the project, we're gonna create the script, and then within that is gonna be our project. So this is all script based. We're gonna log into our OpenStack environment. We're going to set it up, and then we're going to have a UI based. We're going to have a UI based. And then by the end of the class, you'll have your own UI based OpenStack.
Okay.
Okay. VMware is, again, it's going to be our virtual environment. It's going to be our virtual environment where we're going to host our virtual machines, right? Which is our hypervisor 2. We're going to host our virtual machines. We're going to have Ubuntu installed, and we're going to create our OpenStack control plane. Okay. And then
Got it.
within that, yeah. So that's what's going to happen. And this is important, Wayne, because when we talk about this stuff, you'll kind of understand what the difference is between um what I'm saying, right, and what's being discussed, so that you have a sense is, oh, this is what vCenter is, or oh, this is what vSphere is, oh, this is what ESXi, and you're going to hear this a lot, as a cloud architect, right, and you're installing all these things, so you're going to hear this a lot, right? So you want to make sure that you know before you get onto the nitty gritty, the good stuff, you understand the background stuff first, because this is important when you're creating this environment, or you're explaining to somebody else, like, hey, you're going to a recruiter, or you're going to a job interview, and they say, hey, what's the difference between OpenStack and VMware? This is where you can kind of say, oh, OpenStack is this versus, oh, what's VMware versus that. So kind of understand what that means, because it does become an important and crucial part in your discussion and in your design. Any questions so far?
Yeah, I think that's good. That's good. That's good
Perfect.
copy.
So I'm gonna go ahead and get you to share your screen, and we're gonna review the virtual machine that we created. And then in tomorrow's class, we're gonna install our Ubuntu software. And if you want to go ahead and do this beforehand to get a hands-on experience, please feel free to do that. Because I do have instructions on how to create it, and I also have step-by-step playbook for you to tutorial for you to kind of follow if you want as well too. And then tomorrow, what we'll do is we'll actually install it and publicize that on our day 3. So yesterday we talked about, we ended our class again, Wayne. We got you to download Ubuntu desktop only. Did you download that? Is that in your downloads folder? And then the second one was to create a new virtual machine. So you should have server 1 and server 2. So what I'm going to get you to do is create another server and have 2 servers with the
Okay.
same with the
Walk.
same with the same devices like memory, processor, right? Based on what we talked about today, right? And 2 network adapters.
Okay. I see 2 network adapters and 2 hard disks.
The 2 hard disks, right? And
To process.
right. So yeah, so that's what our Ubuntu service is. And then and I know earlier on we talked about RAID. So what I'm going to do is, because you have a Windows machine, I want you to type in computer management for me in the search. Computer management, or run computer management. Computer management. And I want you to open it and run as admin. So imagine this is your server, your system, right? So this is where we're going to create our RAID arrays, Wayne, and I'm going to take control just to get this last point in. And then we're going to call it a day, and we will reconvene tomorrow. We'll reconvene Thursday. I'm sure. Am I able to remote in?
Let me get that correct here for you.
Do you have any questions so far? Does everything make sense now on these last 2 days? All good. All good.
Yeah, we're good for now.
Perfect. Perfect. All right. So am I sharing my screen here? I'm taking control. So what I need you to do is approve the control for me to remote in. Okay, perfect. So if we were to type in, so this is what RAID is, right? When we're going to create it, because we're going to create a RAID in Ubuntu together. So I want you to kind of grasp the concept, and you'll see how we're going to create it in our Ubuntu server, but we're going to be using code. So I want you, the reason why I'm talking about this is because we are going to create similar RAID arrays. We're going to actually, you ever heard of disk partition? When you partition your disks and you give it a volume, similar to that, we're going to be creating this in our OpenStack environment, right? So I want you to understand the difference and what it looks like in a Microsoft environment versus what it's going to look like in our Ubuntu desktop machine, right? So if we go to our storage, right? So this is our storage, right? And we click on disk management. If it allows me to click in, can you click on that for me? Disk management. It's not clickable. Disk management right here. All right. So this is our disk, right? So imagine this being our disk. We have disk 0, and based on our diagram, we have disk 1, which is our E drive, and disk 2, right? So what happens is, if you right click on this for me, and imagine you create your virtual machine, this is what it's going to look like if you were to open this machine on a Windows 10 environment. You would have your disk 0, your disk 1, right? Which would be your hard disk 2. So you'll have 2 disks here, right? And then that would be where you're going to create your from your unallocated space, you're going to create your partitions, right? So what I want you to do is right click for me on disk 0, because I'm not able to do that. Fortunately, it's not letting me. Right here. Right here. Right click. Right click. Okay. So these are the options. And this is where you're going to create your spanned and your striped volumes based on what we discussed. Right? So this is what you're going to create. Now, if this was off, it's online, you're not going to basically do it. But if you wanted to add another disk, for example, virtually on a Windows 10 machine or a Windows 11, right, you would add the disk in this background here, right? In our virtual. So if we created a new machine, for example, right? And we install Windows 10 or Windows 11, similar to what your laptop has. And we add two disks here. We had hard disk 1 and hard disk 2. This is where I can actually turn online my disks, right? And create my RAIDs.
Okay.
You understand? So based on the picture that I showed you, and again, you're going to get these pictures. So based on that picture that I showed you before when I drew it out, when we are talking about RAID 0, RAID 1, RAID 5, and RAID 10, this is where we're going to create your RAIDs.
Okay.
Okay? So if this was offline, you would right click and you would create, if you wanted RAID 1, you'd create it the way RAID 1 is. If you wanted RAID 2, RAID 0, you would create a RAID 0 based on what we talked about. If you wanted to RAID 5, you'd create it. And this is where you would create those partitions from that allocated space and turn these online and give them drive letters, right? So we can actually give them our drive letters. Unfortunately, this system doesn't have two disks to show you, so we can create them together. But you kind of get the gist now that I've showed you, right? Where you would do this.
So I would do what now if I want to create a
You
new
would
disk?
you would want to create, you would need to create a new disk here. So behind here you would add a new disk, and then you would
Okay. And these
reboot the
disks.
machine, turn it on,
Okay.
log into your desktop. So if imagine this is your Windows 10 machine, right? You have your two disks, SCSI 1 and SCSI 2. You would log in, you would type in computer management, and then this is where you would see your hard disk 2, but it'd be called disk 1. And then this is where you would right click and turn it offline and turn it online. And then you would create your RAIDs based on the options that it gives you, right? So if you wanted to create a striped, you would create it based on a RAID 5, right? So that would be your RAID 5. If you want it mirrored, it would be your RAID 1.
That's your question.
Yes.
The two hard disks that we created yesterday, those were one per each for each virtual machine. So I guess we couldn't.
No, it's one machine,
Okay.
which is our BareMetal machine. It's our server. So imagine we take our server, right? We talked about this yesterday. So
Yeah, I
imagine,
get that part. Yeah.
yeah, right?
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. We
But
took
this is
that
a
one
different
machine with two
process, or
disks.
okay.
We took this one machine with two disks, right? And those two disks, we turn them online. One of them has your C drive, your Windows. The other one has your file system or your application system or your logs or your application files. You understand?
So that was a different process than the process you're talking about. These discs are different from the disc yesterday in what way?
Okay, so this disk is your laptop. So this is a physical disk. It's your physical hard drive,
Okay.
right? That's running your hypervisor 2. Remember I showed you the picture? Okay, open up the PowerPoint presentation. If you go to day 1, I sent you a picture. If you open up the
I don't
hypervisor,
know if I have it downloaded.
did you? Okay, you want to download it for me?
If I just
Here, let me share my screen.
if you can explain it, that'd be great. I can take
Sure.
it'll take me a while to get that.
No, no
Yeah.
problem, no problem here. So this was yesterday's video. Again, watch the video again when you have time. But
Mhm.
in this picture, you see my screen. So this is our
I
picture
do.
we talked about yesterday. Okay. So this is my picture, and I put this in your PowerPoint presentation. So this is our branch, our data center, and this is your Ubuntu server that we created yesterday, right? So it has no operating system yet. There is no app yet. There's nothing. There's just two disks and two NIC cards, right? So imagine this your laptop. It's connected to a router that's logging into your ISP. And from here, right, you're opening up Google Chrome and you're downloading these three and you're doing these three things on your internet, right? So once you install, once you download it, you've installed your hypervisor. So this is your hypervisor. This is your VMware workstation, right? So this is your workstation, right? You see that? So this is your workstation, right? So this is where your machine is. Now within this hypervisor 2, using
I see a cursor on the
VMware,
screen, but that's okay.
sorry, say that again.
I don't see a cursor on the screen if you're pointing at something.
Oh, I see. I see. You don't see that. Okay. I'm drawing it out here. I'm just drawing it out. I see what you're saying. Um, Let's see if I can annotate. But let's see if I can annotate. Okay, do you see my screen now?
Yes, I see cursor. Yes,
Okay, you see my cursor? Because I'm trying
I
to
do.
annotate, it's not letting
Yes,
me.
yes,
You know
yes,
why? Okay. Do you see a red marker when I
I do.
draw? Do you see a red marker drawn here?
Yes, I see
Okay.
it. Yeah.
Okay, so this is your laptop. This is your laptop. Okay. You've installed a hypervisor too from the internet, right? You took it from the internet, you downloaded these, you registered your first account, you downloaded the Workstation Pro, you've downloaded the Ubuntu Noble Noombat, which is your 24.02. This is your on-premises environment within Workstation Pro. So from your laptop inside Workstation Pro, this is your Workstation Pro on your laptop. From here, imagine this being a bigger, I kind of zoomed in and made it bigger. So this is our on-premises environment within our branch or data center. Within here, you've created one machine with two physical disks, right? And two physical NIC cards. You with me? You with me?
So I guess when you say Ubuntu, I think of Ubuntu
Um,
as a operating system.
it is an operating system. We haven't installed the operating system yet. We haven't installed an app yet. It's just a blank box, virtual blank box. It's a hypervisor. This is a
So
hypervisor.
Ubuntu, so the thing that's a black box, is that Ubuntu or what is that
That's a
called?
machine. That's just their machine. A box is a machine. Our box or black box is a machine.
And what did we install to get the black box?
You just created it. I'm just basically I'm using this black box and I'm saying black box equals bare metal machine or laptop or server. That's it.
Oh, okay. Okay.
That's
The
it.
ground zero.
It's my annotation of what it's my graphic annotation of what a VM looks like, or virtual machine, or bare metal. That's a virtual machine, right? It's not
Okay, roger
physical
that.
yet, right? So within our laptop, here's a laptop picture. So this is your laptop. You're running Hypervisor 2 that you've downloaded from your website, right? You've downloaded from using your ISP. You've downloaded from your router to your ISP on the internet. You've downloaded what? You've registered your first account, you've downloaded Workstation Pro, and then right, and then you've downloaded Ubuntu Noble Bat. But inside your laptop, you've installed Workstation Pro, right? Your personally laptop that's owned. You're not using your work laptop, and your personal laptop has 236 gigs, right? Which is physical because you're physically looking at it, you're touching it, right? Of that laptop, and you have 150 gigs left, right? You have 8 gigs of RAM and you have 10 core processor CPU. Just remember, virtually, you're taking that 10 and you're basically using half of that with hyperthreading. So imagine you're taking 10, right? But you're physically using 2 out of the 10 or 1 out of the 10. So you're using half of the 2. So in this one machine, you're using one vCPU out of the 2. Which is what you're using out of your full 10. So if you're saying if you've got a 10 core laptop on your motherboard, you have 10 cores. On your virtual machine, you gave it 2. You're not physically using the full 2 or the 10. You're using one CPU out of it. Make sense?
One physical CPU is being used by Workstation
One
Pro.
yeah, if we're using hyperthreading. Because hyperthreading is half of your physical CPU. So if I've got a 100 core CPU server, right? This bare metal. Let's say my server, my physical server, and I sent you a picture of what a server looks like. So my server, this is my server, right? Let's say, for example, this is my server, okay? And my server has 10 CPUs, and it's got 8 gigs of RAM. It's got 1 gig slot. Each slot is 1 gig, right? Because it's got 8 gigs, right? So what happens here in a physical environment? So in a virtual environment, it uses hyperthreading. So you're not really physically using 10 cores on this blank machine. You're using half of it. So if you're giving yourself 2, you're not really physically using all of your 10 cores. You're using half of it. Okay?
But it's two. Is it two virtual CPUs or one?
It's two right now. We're using two virtual CPUs. So if you go back to your machine, you look at your machine, you open it up, you'll see it says two CPUs, two cores. You're given two cores. So if you open up Workstation Pro, right, and then click on the settings of that virtual machine.
I believe
and it says, so if you double click and you double click on CPU, it'll show you on the right side cores, and it'll show you all that stuff there. So remember, each machine, you're not really using 10 cores of your machine. You're physically using 5 CPUs. And then out of that 5, you're using 1 or 2. You get it? So the more you're not really
right.
And right. You're not really using the whole 5. You're using, or 10. You're using 5 of it. So basically that 10, if you're using 10 cores, let's say, for example, you're using 2 cores out of your 10. So you're giving, from your physical, you're giving 2 cores to your virtual machine. You're not really using 2 cores. You're using half of it. You're using half a CPU or 1 CPU at most, unless it's mission critical, right? That where you're going to need 4 CPUs. And I've seen servers with 4 CPUs on a virtual machine. Out of the 5. So this is hyper-threading. This is something totally different. And this was something that we could have done as well, too. We could have talked about. I need a summary of software stack sequence. I don't get your question.
Workstation Pro, we started off with Workstation Pro, then this, and then that.
Yeah, so we're still talking about yesterday. So we talked about OpenStack, we talked about hypervisors, we talked about Workstation Pro, we talked about vSphere versus vCenter, because we talked about that yesterday, versus what ESXi means. Right? And then today, and again, you're going to get all this stuff, Wayne, so you don't have to worry about it. You'll get like what we talked about. And, what summary are you looking for?
Like we start off with Workstation Pro, which is our cloud computing platform.
Yeah.
And then you can fill in the blanks for me. I can give you a form of a sentence. We started off with Workstation Pro, and then on top of that, we installed such, and then after that, we installed such.
We didn't install anything yet.
Okay.
So we didn't install anything yet. We're not there yet. Well, we're going to start installing it tomorrow. What I want you to do is, yesterday we left off with an assignment to create another machine. I need you to get used to creating a machine first. If you can create that one machine, and then just for now, a blank machine, you have you have OpenStack Ubuntu 1 and you have OpenStack Ubuntu 2. So that way you have 2 machines, and that way you can use it as I'll install OpenStack and Ubuntu on 1, and then you'll install Ubuntu and OpenStack on 2. Okay? So you have 2 machines doing the same thing.
Okay.
So what I need you to do tonight is create another machine. Right? Create another machine. And that'll be your assignment for tonight. And again, just create it. That way we have 2 machines. And then tomorrow, let's say tomorrow, we'll talk about tomorrow and Thursday, but for now, just create another machine. And then tomorrow, first thing we do is we'll talk about actually installing Ubuntu. And then that way you can do that. So that's about it, Wayne. So this will be recorded for you to watch and for everybody else to watch, and join in and go along. Again, this is our basic environment here, and you'll have a copy of this. Again, message me at any time. I added you to the group. Message me at any time if you have any questions while you're doing that. While you're making the new machine and creating this new machine, right? So you're creating this whole thing right here, right? So this is what you're creating. Okay.
Okay.
That's what you're going to be creating on your Workstation Pro. Right.
All right.
Let me see
Create
if
a
I
new
can get it
machine.
here. Yeah. So I just need